Second time around is amazing. I would say this is one of the strongest written episodes of Cheers, and that's saying something because there are some really incredible episodes. This is written by Shelley Steinkellner and Bill Steinkellner, is directed by Thomas Lofaro, which is quite interesting because it's the first episode not directed by James Burrows. It's the 17th episode of the 4th season, but it's also the only episode in this season not directed by James Burrows. I don't know why. If anybody knows why that decision was made, please feel free to let me know. But either way, it's an amazing episode. And we also get the introduction of Lilith, and I'll go into more detail about her in a moment, but I'm very, very, very happy about that. I do think that when you watch Cheers and then go back and watch it, there are things that are funny that might not have been as funny the first time. For example, I feel like the interaction between Frasier and Lilith here, and I'll go into more detail in a moment, was funnier because I know what happens with the character further on. Now, I won't spoil that. I won't go into too much detail at all about future Lilith, but based purely on this episode, I think it is funnier once you've watched the rest of it and gone back. And that's one of the beautiful things about rewatching the show, is that things just hit a little differently once you've already gone on this journey with the characters. I also feel like this episode is a little bit of a turning point in a few ways, partly with Frasier and his attitude, and also with Sam and Diane because of something that happens right at the end. So there will be spoilers as I go through the episode. Now I'm going to go through it chronologically. I have a lot of notes because there are a lot of things I love. There are a lot of quotes that I'm going to share, things that really, really made me laugh. So I apologise in advance if this ends up being one of my longest Cheers discussions. It might be. We'll see how that goes. I also apologise if you can hear a faint drilling noise. One of my neighbours is doing some DIY and I don't think the microphone's picking it up, but I apologise if that is something that appears every now and then. So we start off with Cliff coming into Cheers with his mother's homemade pretzels, and then we have Lilith. Frasier enters Cheers, introduces Lilith, and this is Bebe Neuwirth's introduction, and it's just absolutely fantastic. And we have an exchange between them. Frasier asks her what she thinks of Cheers. She analyses the situation. We very quickly get a strong indication of her character, and also her voice is slightly different. Because obviously before rewatching Cheers, I made it to the end, and then I had seen Frasier before, and I didn't realise how much her voice just slightly changes. Over time, I feel like it just gets a tiny little bit deeper, but I absolutely love it. Brilliant, brilliant introduction, and one of my favourite lines, and this line is one of the things that's funnier once you've watched the rest of the series, is when Frasier comes out of the bathroom, Lilith's left, and he says, "I didn't much care for Lilith." And there is so much in that statement, that one simple statement that I love. And then he goes into Sam's office to weep. And then Sam, with a little help from Carla, comes up with an idea to introduce him to somebody. And Carla says, and I have to say this, Sam's response made me laugh, because Carla says, "Couldn't you give me one of your hand-me-downs?" And Sam says, "I already did." Obviously referring to Diane, but he decides that this is a good idea, and we have the introduction of a character called Candi, with an I, like Gandhi. That's not me saying that, that's part of the episode. And she's played by Jennifer Tilly, and she says that Frasier has a cute forehead. And Frasier replies by saying nobody's ever told him that, but they have said he has a cute anxiety. Which I rather found to be very, very amusing. The joke kind of went over Candy's head, but I had a good laugh with it. We then have another funny quote that I absolutely loved. It's not so much the quote, more of just the sentiment. Cliff says something, and Carla is coming up behind him and says something negative to put Cliff down, as always. And Norm says, "Why do you open your mouth?" Which I thought was a pretty good point. He knows that Carla's going to say something, and Cliff remarked that they need to put a little bell on her. And I just thought that was so entertaining. And Cliff and Norm have a great rapport in general, but there's something about the way they interact in this one. They're basically always together in this episode, and it works so well, and I absolutely love it. And then we move on, and the gang are discussing the following morning how Frasier's date might have went, and they make a lot of innuendos regarding the restaurant they ate at, and they're not actually talking about a restaurant. They're laughing and having fun. Woody's laughing as well, and I was waiting for him to say something. And he said, "I wonder if the restaurant was crowded." Obviously, without context, that's not a funny sentence, but definitely very entertaining. Woody just completely oblivious. And then we have something that I think nobody expected. Frasier bursts into tears with Candi and says, "Say hello to Mrs. Frasier Crane." The implication there is that they're married, but we learn very, very quickly that actually they're not married yet, but they're planning on getting married within the hour. And as they say, it has been 16 hours since they met, and that's definitely very quick. And we have this adorable moment from Diane, and Diane confronts Frasier and says, "Tell me I'm wrong and I'll be forever silent," because she's given him a theory about why he's getting married so quickly, and Frasier says, "You're wrong." And Diane, in true Diane fashion, whines, "No, I'm not." And it was just this adorable little performance. Shelley Long is, of course, fantastic, and I rather enjoyed that. And then we get what would be the wedding, and we have Lou Fant as Justice of the Peace. Woody is playing the piano, which is absolutely brilliant. I mentioned this before. I love it when they play the piano in Cheers. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, I think it gives us a really great atmosphere. And ultimately, Sam, Diane, Candi, and Frasier end up going into Sam's office because Sam and Diane are convinced that this just isn't the right thing for Frasier to be doing. Mostly Diane, but Sam is there to support the argument. And Frasier starts saying it is, and then he ends up saying something quite nasty about Candi. He didn't mean it, and he realised as soon as he said it. And he apologised, and they both apologised to each other, saying they didn't deserve each other. And Candi is actually a very likeable character. And I'm saying this because usually when we have Sam's dates or his former dates, they're not necessarily the most interesting characters. We don't really get the time to know them. We either don't like them. Well, I personally either don't like them or I don't have an opinion. But actually, I thought Candi was a really good character, and I did really like her in this. And obviously it was the right decision that they didn't get married. I don't think things would have went in the right direction if that had been the case. And then we have this rather fascinating scene at the end between Sam and Diane, where Sam says, "No bride, no groom, I guess it's up to us." And I think it was obvious to the viewer what that meant. They needed to go and deal with the bar and make sure people were, not just hanging around waiting for the wedding. But Diane smiled and thought she meant Sam was proposing they get married. And we have this really interesting exchange between them, and physical contact as well, where they're holding hands, and it's really sweet and really moving. And as Frasier pointed out in a previous episode, they still very much love each other. But in true Cheers fashion, they managed to keep things quite light-hearted here, and they were playing this game with each other, with Diane answering the question and Sam making up the question, and it was a very fun, light-hearted way to end things. But the spark between them just seems to be getting stronger and brighter and more powerful, and I just want to knock their heads together and tell them both to admit what they're both feeling. But more on that as and when we get to it. But this episode is just absolutely fantastic. I think second time around is so funny, so well written. The performances are brilliant. Every single line. I feel like every second or third line was a joke that made me laugh out loud or something that I found really entertaining. But every line hits at the exact right time, and I just absolutely adore it. Perfect episode. And as I said, it's a turning point for certain characters. I think with Frasier, we obviously have a turning point with a change in his mood and his outlook. And then with Sam and Diane, I think we're taking steps in a more positive direction there. But as I said, more on that when we come to it. And of course, Lilith, because I love her. And I don't remember how I felt about her when I watched this episode for the first time. I'd seen Frasier first, so I was aware of the character, but I wasn't really aware of the journey they went on in Cheers. But having seen all of Cheers now, as I said, when I go back and watch the episodes, certain things just hit a little differently. And this is one of them. Absolutely love her. Bebe Neuwirth is fantastic, and second time around is absolutely amazing.